Fresh solutions for a persistent problem. China announced 38 new punishments for intellectual property infringers. Will these additional barricades make a difference? And 3,000 foreign workers have lost their jobs at an electronics factory in Japan, which fills orders for Apple. What's behind this alarming slash? And is it a harbinger of more economic and employment uncertainty ahead? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. China has announced new measures in its ongoing efforts to battle intellectual property infringement. The National Development and Reform Commission, China's state planner, along with altogether 37 government departments, released a document on Tuesday that lists 38 different measures to be applied to IP violators starting this month. The new measures were announced just days after Chinese President Xi Jinping met U.S. President Donald Trump at the G20 summit last Saturday in Buenos Aires on the sidelines of the G20 summit. Now, according to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, China will work to resolve economy and trade-related issues in China-U.S. relations in a process of a new round of reform and opening up, and in line with the domestic needs of its market and people. So how meaningful are these new measures? How are they going to be enforced? What obstacles continue to stand in the way? And can these new steps help untangle China and the U.S. from the high-stakes trade conflict? Joining me for the discussion in the Beijing studio is Lin Bonan, Managing Partner of Zhongzi Law Office, and from Boston, Jason Chan, attorney from Seed, Chan and Associates, LLC. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, according to Tuesday's memorandum, dishonest conduct from individuals or enterprises, such as repeated patent infringements and falsification of documents during patent applications, will be subject to punishment, including being put on a blacklist that will be shared in public. Also receiving government financial support, being issued corporate bonds and buying property, even buying train tickets, just some of the transactions that might be made more difficult for accused infringers. So Mr. Lin, let me go to you. What do you see as the most intimidating or most significant punishments on this list, and how groundbreaking are these new measures?
Okay, this is a very important document and very interesting development in the Chinese legal protection of IP. But to have a clear and correct understanding of this new document, we need to look into the details of the document. Mm-hmm. And there is an article in the first section that gives definition of the meaning of repeated infringement and also refuse to discontinue of the infringement. Mm. So the definition is directed to the government procedure for the administrative enforcement against patent infringement. So in China, we have a parallel system of enforcing patent. So one way is a judicial system where a patent owner can sue the infringer in court. And other procedure is the administrative. The patent owner can file complaint in the Patent Administrative Bureau. So this document is focused on the administrative procedure rather than the judicial procedure.
Okay, so Jason, let me go to you. How significant do you see this this memorandum, and whether that's going to make a small difference, let's say, in China's fight to protect IP?
Well, I think it's very important. I think any type of punishment that would restrict a business in terms of travel, in terms of expanding, and certainly in restricting funds to a company that certainly would need one to expand is very important. But I think the bottom line at the end of the day is how much of this enforcement is actually going to happen, because enforcement is very difficult. It is certainly a timely process. It's a expensive process, and for companies to kind of know if they ultimately want to comply with these new rules is to see how strict the enforcement is going to be and how consistent it's going to be, so they can kind of factor that into their business and their business models.
Mr. Lin, do you have an answer for that question? How strict is the enforcement going to be, and how much of a challenge is it going to be for the Chinese government to coordinate the different departments and commissions involved? 38, that's quite a challenge, I would imagine.
And as I see it, the enforcement of these measures, there's no problem. This is an administrative procedure and can be enforced by the agencies. The bottom line is that this is only focusing on the administrative procedure. So it only covers part of the infringing act. So in the end, this is not a big deal.
But what is really going to make a big deal? So you are saying basically this memorandum is good, but where is the chunk of the challenge we are faced with, Mr. Lin?
Okay, in China, as we said, there is a parallel system, and most of the patent owners prefer to choose judicial system to litigate in court. There is a high volume of litigation in court, and continued, repeated infringement through administrative procedure. I mean, if there is a decision by the officials in administrative procedure, and the infringer continues to conduct infringement action, this constitutes a very small part, because most of the time you see a court decision injunctions against infringement. And these are not covered by this particular document.
Okay, so a lot of work needs to be done there. I'm going to go to Jason here. Jason, for your clients in the United States, American companies possibly doing business here in China, what has been their biggest complaint? And do you see some part of those concerns could be potentially addressed by China's steps, including this latest one in protecting IP?
The biggest concern is that when they're doing business in China, there's been a lot of complaints from companies that there's essentially people stealing their trade secrets. And obviously that's a big concern because it's very costly to create these new innovations for these companies. And consistency is certainly something that they want to be comfortable with in terms of planning the future, and they're certainly pouring in a lot of money in their new innovations. So they just want to make sure that whatever work product that they come up with and any new innovations that would certainly be protected by the same laws and protections that we have here in the United States.
So Mr. Lin, basically we heard this word of theft of business secrets. Is that the same thing we're talking about, IP infringement? If yes, is this memorandum going to make even just a small difference, or if not, what has to be done?
IP theft, if we use this as a concept, is covered by the broad concept of IP infringement. But in fact, IP theft, most of the times we talk about the trade secret misappropriation. It's not patent infringement. And this document covers only patent infringement. So this is not going to be related to IP theft.
Okay. Well, what has to be done? Are we seeing any signals or more signals that the Chinese government is committed to do more in this regard, especially in the part, Mr. Lin, that you were mentioning, the judicial system building and reform?
Yes, I think most important thing we have to note is the judicial reform. It has been continuing for a number of years. And this is going to have a very big impact on the Chinese legal system. The judicial reform has many aspects. One aspect is the introduction of the concept of precedent. And there is no such thing in the Chinese legal system up to now. For more than 100 years, this is the first time for the court to introduce the concept of precedent. This will going to improve the transparency and predictability of the outcome of litigation.
Jason, I'm sure you are much more familiar with the American business sentiments and the American legal system. Do you think there is enough understanding of the kind of legal framework and history of the development of the legal framework here in China, especially when it comes to IP protection, because it is not going to happen overnight?
It is a very complicated system. Even in the United States, we have copyright infringement lawsuits that happen constantly, and it's a very difficult thing because copyright infringement is a very particular and detailed area of law in which litigation happens constantly. But I think more importantly, what it needs to happen is that this litigation needs to go on. It needs to be consistent in terms of the rulings so that people know prior to litigation what ultimately the rulings will be, so that essentially different companies can make plans if they want to continue litigating these things, or if it's something that wants to be settled out of court. So it's certainly something that needs to be developed over time, and the only way to really develop that type of law is for litigation to actually take place.
Yeah, well, at this moment we have about 90 days window of opportunity, whether it's starting from beginning of December, whether it's starting from beginning of January. It's all very short, Mr. Lin. So China will try to do everything possible in, I guess, as I said in the beginning, to address, you know, economy and trade related issues in U.S.-China relation in the process of new round of reform and opening up. But what is there any hope that some significant steps can be taken in the 90 days so that people start to see the genuine will and effort and determination and real action that China has taken?
As I see it, the IP issue is not a major target. It should not be a major target of the negotiation. And the IP issue is not going to be an easy issue to be settled and discussed in 90 days. And 90 days is too short. And we need time for China to have reform on this judicial system, and administrative measures like this, as published in the paper, is also interesting and important. But it's only count for a small part of the trade dispute, I think.
But do you see over the long run there is a tendency and there is great effort on the part of China as well to protect its IP intellectual property right protection in general? As we know, the latest reports coming out of WIPO, the UN agency in charge of intellectual property protection, China is filing the world's largest number of IP. So I guess it must be in China's interest that its own people have a sharper awareness of IP protection. Mr. Lin again.
Yes, the reform on this judicial system and also amendment of patent law has been under discussion for the past 10 years. And reform is part of the Chinese government agenda. It's unrelated to this foreign trade negotiation. And this is going to have ultimate result. I think the yesterday, Prime Minister Li Keqiang signed this paper for this patent amendment bill. It's going to be submitted to the Parliament.
Okay, we're going to keep a close watch on the situation. 90 days, really not much, but we really have to put things into context. And many thanks to my two guests, the Lin Bonan, Managing Partner of Zhongzi Law Office, and from Boston, Jason Chan, attorney from Seed, Chan and Associates, LLC. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, I'm going to take a very short break, and when I come back, a veteran electronics maker linked to Apple has slashed 3,000 foreign workers from its factory in Japan. Is this employment turmoil a precursor for more supply chain shakeups ahead? Stay with me. Nearly 3,000 foreign workers subcontracted to Sharp Corporation, a Japanese multinational electronics producer, have been laid off in one of the company's factories in Kameyama in Japan. The company has reportedly moved production of some sensors for Apple's iPhones to a Chinese plant owned by its parent company, Foxconn. Founded in 1912, the 106-year-old electronics maker Sharp enjoyed plenty of success in its heyday, but as new tech giants rose, business took a nosedive. In 2016, the company was taken over by Foxconn, but has yet to revive. Meanwhile, as Apple's biggest iPhone assembler, Foxconn itself is facing what it has called a very difficult and competitive year and is considering cutting expenses and restructuring. So what prompted the massive relocation? What could come next? And located at the lower end of the supply chain, how can these manufacturers survive in an uncertain environment? Joining me in Beijing is Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and from Tokyo, Takesato Watanabe, Professor Emeritus at Doshisha University. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, as I said, Sharp's Kameyama factory reportedly encountered difficulties during an assembly process for the facial recognition feature in the iPhone X, which led to shipment delays that were partly to blame for shortages when the phone made its debut in November 2017. Immediate reasons for Sharp layoffs is still not known at this moment. So I'm going to ask Professor Watanabe, we're only talking about foreign workers here, right? What about the Japanese local workers?
This is very much complicated, but the most important thing which was done by the Japanese government and also the Sharp, the company itself, is the government didn't pay attention to the reality. What is actually happening, most of the workers from outside, they came here to Japan to get, of course, more money, but beyond that, they want to be trained toward higher level of techniques. So both of them were, you see, denied by the Sharp and also by the government of Japan, who doesn't want to see the reality. So it is not so easy for now Japan to recover, and also for the Sharp company itself to recover from those atrocities. The main reason for this is that so many, you see, are coming to Japan, but they cannot get realized the dreams they had in their own countries. This is the first step. And the second step is that Japanese government want to say that Japan economy is up and up, but actually Mr. Abe's proposal or speech in the Diet is wrong. The experts, they say that the Japanese economy is not going up but getting down and down slowly. So those things are the true root, you see, the causes of the situation that we have now.
Okay. Well, Professor Gong, you want to say something immediately?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I think the incident you described is just a trigger event. I think the more fundamental level, it reflects that the manufacturing industry in Japan is not very competitive because of the high labor cost. I think the Japanese government has tried different means, and in this case, they invited the foreign workers to Japan. These are actually second or third generation Japanese, mostly from countries in South America, in Brazil, in Peru. So I think this is not going to change the fundamental picture of a high-income country that still wants to compete in an industry where labor cost is very critical. So I think that's the fundamental reason. And Sharp being a subsidiary company of Foxconn, it doesn't have much of a choice.
Well, what we have understood is that actually Foxconn, as you said, the parent company of Sharp, which is also a company owned by a Taiwanese tycoon, they have been supplying to Apple for many years now. They are actually facing quite some difficulties, or much more difficulties this year than in the past, and they have been talking about restructuring. Now, the company is said to aim to cut some 2.88 billion US dollars or from expenses in 2019. So, Professor Gong, what are the reasons that Foxconn is facing so much difficulties at this moment?
Well, Foxconn's biggest customer is Apple, and Apple is not doing very well these days in China. I mean, it's really okay, but you know, facing the competition, the fierce competition from companies like Huawei, Xiaomi, you know, Oppo, it's having a difficult time. So I would imagine that Apple is exerting some pressure on Foxconn to cut cost. So that's an area where Foxconn has to. It's actually quite a customary practice in the industry to have your downstream customer to ask you to continuously taking efforts to cut costs, and in this case, Foxconn is probably facing this pressure, and they have to come up with ways to slash costs and to be competitive.
Yeah. Well, back to the Japanese labor market, we were talking about traditionally high salaries, which is putting competitiveness difficulties for the company. Now, as we know that just 2 days ago, Foxconn announced that they're considering setting up a factory in Vietnam in response to the ongoing trade war between China and the United States. So, Professor Watanabe, what can companies like Sharp do in this day and age to save itself from further declining when we are seeing companies continuously relocating their factories from developed countries to developing countries and to even less developed countries where the labor cost is even lower?
The Sharp was established for a long time ago, but actually Sharp wanted to make the reforming the structure of the company from the ordinary electricity tools, equipment companies to the high definition image TV producing corporation. But it failed because of some technical problems, and also because of some capital lacking situation, very serious one. So this is not so simple, but if the Sharp want to be, recovering from such a very miserable situation, they have to do the 2 things at least. One is that they must train younger workers or foreign the workers to come to Japan to get the quality of the intelligence and the techniques of the many fields be upgraded. If it can do like that, in 2-3 years of time, the Sharp can recover. Sharp can go up more than ever.
Okay.
But now the leading body of the Sharp, which was controlled by Hon Hai, they want to get the benefit as big as possible, as soon as possible. This is very difficult. So I cannot expect that Hon Hai, in the name of the Sharp, can get a good result.
Well,
soon, very soon.
Yeah. Well, I think Foxconn, or as you said, Hon Hai, is also faced with similar challenges here in China, right? In the past decades or so, we are so used to the picture of Chinese production lines where Chinese workers make really pennies and repeating the same work that is very soon likely to be replaced by automation, and very soon these masses of laborers will be faced with the same situation. You know, they're not getting the kind of tool set necessary to prepare for the future, and when orders fall, they're immediately faced with unemployment. Professor Gong, is that the kind of picture Foxconn or similar OEMs, originally equipment manufacturers, are looking at in China?
What you said is pretty accurate characterization of its business model. I mean, the Foxconn business is about assembly, and assembly, at least up until this plant in Wisconsin was open, was very labor intensive. I remember several years ago, Foxconn was facing rising labor costs and moved to the city of Zhongzi in Henan province. And I remember I went to the Zhongzi railway station. There's a big banner right across the railway station saying they're hiring people. They're hiring over 100,000 people. Mm-hmm. So I think at one point, Foxconn is probably the world's largest company in terms of employment. Over close to like 1 million people they employ. It's a huge, huge company. But of course, this business model is changing these days because of the more intensive use of robotics. The factory they're going to open in Wisconsin is precisely all about this. And I think Japan is sort of caught in the middle. I mean, on one side, the biggest market is indeed the United States, and companies will, Apple at least would like to have their OEM operations going back to the U.S. Based on a model of more intensive use of robotics. Whether this model can succeed is still anybody's guess. Mm-hmm. But at the very least, they're constantly facing the challenge of rising cost here in China, let alone in Japan. So the migration of manufacturing customers out of more expensive labor cost countries to lower labor cost countries is a gross trend. I mean, it happens historically. Okay. It moved from North America to Japan, to South Korea, and China, and now it's going to Vietnam. So it is a historical trend. It's very difficult to fight against. Mm.
Sorry, Professor Watanabe, what do you foresee is going to happen next? Are we going to see more such slashing of jobs, or maybe after this there will be some time to breathe for companies such as Sharp?
Now you see we have the living in the age of the competition of capitalism to get more benefit and the happy life of the ordinary people. But in case of Japan, the Japanese government is looking at or seeing only the Trump's idea of the United States. Mr. Trump doesn't have the global idea to have the common, the prosperity upon the energetic efforts of the people. And Mr. Abe doesn't understand it. But Mr. Trump, if his administration continues for 3 years to come, the outcoming from his political activities is not so good. Mr. Abe must realize it and must learn from many other past, failures. This is the analysis of myself.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Many thanks to my two guests, John Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and in Tokyo, Takesato Watanabe, Professor Emeritus at Doshisha University. And that's it for this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.